Hi, I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, host of Highly Sensitive Money. I'm a money coach, certified financial planner, and highly sensitive person who brings money and social justice together. I grew up questioning why we have poverty in a world that can provide for everyone. In this show, I chat with highly sensitive people on how they handle money and with money experts on how they cultivate social justice in their work. Join us as we explore money and sensitivity while honoring that all of our well being is connected. I'm excited to introduce Meenadchi, a pioneer in ancestral healing and financial empowerment. Her unique approach highlights how addressing deep rooted traumas can transform our relationship with money. With a background in occupational therapy and experience working with trauma affected communities, Meenadchi brings a fresh perspective. As a practitioner of family constellation therapy, she helps individuals heal emotional and ancestral wounds, unlocking greater financial empowerment. Her work also advocates for decolonizing nonviolent communication. We'll dive into the concept of a sensory budget, a tool to help manage energy and capacity, an essential topic for those of us who are highly sensitive. Additionally, Minachi's authentic business approach challenges traditional success models, encouraging a deeper alignment between money and personal values. So, Minachi, it was such a joy to prepare for this conversation, to meet you as randomly as
Mhm.
here in Mexico City. I've had the chance to interview a couple of people that have gone through trauma of money, so it's nice to now like be able to interview a teacher at the trauma of
Mhm.
money. So that's really exciting.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of bits of sweetness. I think that the work you're doing is incredibly tender and deep, and I love those moments of synchronicity when the universe says something makes sense and something is working out, so the way also that we met feels really aligned and lovely. Mm.
Yeah. So Manachi, we met at a writing group in Mexico
Mhm.
City, and it was such a pleasure to meet and then to take a walk and learn more about how our interests overlap and now to have you here. It really is a pleasure.
It is also a pleasure for me, so thank you for having me.
So let's dive into your work. Um,
Okay.
Well, actually, the first question that I love asking people just to get a little bit of a grounding on who you are and where you come from in regards to money is what was the financial background of your childhood?
Mm.
And whatever you're comfortable sharing, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
And how do you see that that might continue to impact you today?
Yeah. I had a very, very secure financial background on my Amma side, and my Amma, who is my mother, kind of like stewarded all the things in the house. You know what I mean? She was the primary caregiver, she was the primary breadwinner, she held everything down. And we come from an upper caste background. So I'm Sri Lankan Tamil. We come from an upper caste background. I think historically, for at least 5 generations back, my Amma side of the family has been physically safe. Like my 5 generations back grandmother had like a plot of land that the family continued to live on and that actually my Amma still lives on today. So there was like a quality of real security growing up. And it wasn't security without precaution. I think around the time I think when my sister was born and my appa lost his job, I was in private school and we switched over to public school, and I've had a public school education my whole life, but my amma took care of everything, was always very, very financially safe. And I think there are two things that that experience gifted me. One is that I don't think that I think a lot of the clients that I work with have like a real entanglement with money and self-worth. And I think that that actually exists across the class spectrum. You know what I mean? Like even people who are like loaded and have been intergenerationally loaded for whatever, like can still have that enmeshment. But that wasn't my amma style or way of being. Like my amma is the type of woman who was proud of having 40-year-old underwear. It's like just buy some new underwear. You know what I mean? Like, but I think so one, I didn't grow up with an enmeshment of like money is equated to worth. And also my amma, I was really lucky. So I'm first generation American, and was born 3 days before the riots that started a genocide, ethnic cleansing civil war at home in Sri Lanka. And so throughout my childhood, my appa was always running back and forth to San Francisco, picking up asylum seekers, refugees, et cetera. A lot of times, some who stayed in the US, but a lot of times who were in transit to Canada. And they always stayed in our house. And so there was a very clear sense that, like, any resources that you had were meant to be community resources, that this is like, that a home is a place for people to come to. And I remember my amma, um, she taught me never ever loan anybody money, always give. Like, if you have it and you can give it, then you give it. And if people want to pay you back, then that's a thing that they can do, but that's not the way you move with money. It's like, if it's family or if it's community and you have it to give, just give it. And I think those are two primary blessings that I got from my amma and the stability we grew up with.
Wow. And I love something you said, mentioned at the beginning. You've been physically safe 5 generations back on your Oma's side.
And that's like a nuanced thing, you know what I mean? Because it's not like they're I also come from a lineage that has had domestic violence running throughout it, you know what I mean? So there's nuances there. But yes, we have had a stable physical home for 5 generations back that has always been held by the women.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And anytime that anyone grows up with like food insecurity, housing insecurity, it can really, really change the way that you move as an adult.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And I imagine that the way that you saw money as a child, or that you saw resources as a child, right, that they were the community's resources, has continued to impact your work today. Because I know that social justice is such a huge part of what you do. For people that don't have that background, that grew up in very much like mine is mine and everyone's trying to take mine, like what are ways that you help people move through that?
Oh, I think the primary population that comes to me doesn't actually come from a mine is mine background per se. I think the population that tends to be drawn to me and my work is the one that overgives. A lot of the people that I work with are self employed entrepreneurs and people who are wanting to do good in the world. And one of the things I'm always talking about and teaching people is that pouring forward is an essential part of our business, but we must pour forward from overflow and not self sacrifice. I think the people who tend to be drawn to me are community oriented people who tend to undercharge, overwork, like just be exhausted all the time and like be terrified of receiving money, terrified of who money will turn them into. I think there's a lot of fear for people who are doing community oriented work that if I have financial resources, if I am well, I will turn into like a greedy corporate slum monger who will then begin exploiting and extracting from everyone around me. And that isn't the case. We can have a healthy relationship with money. We can let money nourish us and we can pour money forward. Um, so I think that tends to be the primary the primary stuff that I see in my work.
So you see people who come in that may be overgiving, who are afraid of becoming mine is mine.
Who
Right.
yes, the people who are afraid that if I have money, I will become a mine is mine person. That feels very accurate.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I sense that in myself, and like the balances that I've had to have. Like part of my money story is that I've realized that there was inequality in like in my immediate family when I was very young, and I didn't know how to say no.
Mm,
So I gave and gave and gave and gave, and then I went the other extreme of like no one's going to take care of me, so I have to take care of myself. So a lot of tightness and constriction.
yeah.
It's so nuanced when we again.
And I feel like I have had very similar swings. So even though I grew up financially safe, after I went to college, my mama put me through undergrad. And after that, I was on my own. She was always there as someone who would have my back if I needed it. But I was working as an actress or waiting tables or working in nonprofit. I got very accustomed to like living off of $30,000 a year in California. Like, right? Okay. And I think also kind of having been immersed in a sort of I think that within the social justice world, broadly speaking, there's a lot of money trauma and there's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of equating money to evil. And it took me a long time, also in my own way, to understand how to have a healthy relationship with money that actually allowed me to be well. And, like for example, now I have structures set up within my business so that I'm pouring forward, but it took me time to figure out how do I do this in the right way. And I think one of the things that's challenging for many of us when we recognize inequity is the balance of how is it okay that I am well when so many others are not? Like, make it make sense. And the truth is, it doesn't make sense and it never will. That's not a math equation that we can actually solve, but there are pieces of that math equation that we can sit with and sort of attend to within our own sphere of influence.
Yeah. And when we remember also that, like, if 3% of the population has like a more virtuous mindset, I don't know if virtuous is the word I want to use, a mindset that includes the collective well-being. Like, when 3% of the population reaches a different point of view, that's enough to shift the entire amount. It may not be as quick as we want it to be, but it's
Yeah.
possible.
That's a really beautiful statistic. I love that. Yeah.
And I just came back from a conference that we had in South Dakota, and it was for now, yeah.
Yeah, I remember you
For it was, the layovers were much better than I was expecting.
Okay,
Like, it
okay.
all worked out. I know. I was like, the layovers were, they were
Uh-huh.
great. They were
Okay.
so much shorter. But we went to see Crazy Horse. Are you familiar with
Mm.
Crazy Horse?
Not really. I know the name, but I actually don't know the story.
So Crazy Horse is in the same Black Hills, which are sacred lands for the Dakota people in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And they made Mount Rushmore on a sacred site. They just took it,
Yeah.
made a
Yeah.
colonized it. And then Crazy Horse was the original owners of that land. It was their way of saying, we want to have a stand. We want to have something that reminds us of who we were before. And it's not just about the person Crazy Horse, but what this person stands for. And they asked someone to work on this. And when he was working on carving a statue out of a mountain, he realized it was not going to happen in his lifetime.
Lifetime.
So when you come into this memorial, into this beautiful call to, like, work for generations, it's a
Mm,
key part of what he says. Like, this is going to take generations to build. And it's
mm,
not just a statue on a mountain, it's also a university, it's also a hospital.
mm,
It's dedicated to a community. And it's just, so much of the time I feel that people who really embrace social justice, we forget that we're not doing this alone, right? We're part of
mm,
an embedded community. And that sometimes we have to really step back and be like, maybe I won't see it, but my great grandchildren will see it.
mhm. Yeah.
And at the same time, not just sit and do nothing. So it's like that
Yeah.
paradox
Yeah.
of holding it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back to your work, you do you use different modalities, family
Mhm.
constellations, the trauma of money, somatics. Let's kind of, I would love to just kind of present each of these pieces
Okay. Yeah.
however you feel most comfortable.
Yeah. Okay. I think, for me, the base of my work will always be nonviolent communication. So I was introduced to nonviolent communication in 2002, changed my world, changed my relationship with myself, changed my relationship with my amma. And in 2017, 2018, I revamped the framework because the acronym is NVC for nonviolent communication. Conventional NVC doesn't acknowledge systems of power and privilege or any of those dynamics. And oh my God, Deanna is pulling out my book. Yeah, so I wrote a book.
Here it is. Link in show notes.
I wrote a workbook and developed a framework on decolonizing nonviolent communication, which there's many different components of it, but one piece is A, learning to listen to the body in terms of saying what we want to say, and B, setting our authenticity as actually the defining marker of violence and nonviolence. We can't move through the world being afraid to have impact, but we can move through the world seeking to speak with a voice that is authentic and then being ready to make amends as needed. And authenticity is always going to change and, all those things. And I had been invited, one of my mentors, Jayanti Siva, who I call Jayanti Akka, means big sister. She had asked me to assist at a retreat, an NVC retreat, and that's where I was introduced that's where I was introduced to family constellation therapy through the person who has now become another teacher, Sarah Payton. And I love family constellation work. It's a somatic modality for clearing intergenerational trauma from the nervous system. And I love it because it dovetails so beautifully with our communication gunk, right? Like, because our communication patterns are totally inherited. Like, then the nasty ways we talk to ourselves, right? The inner critics we all have, like, those did not begin with us. And so beginning to weave this modality in has been so beautiful and helpful. I think also in helping people find their center, helping me find my center while navigating this world. And then sort of there were a few different kind of like pieces that stacked together, but I had when I was starting to be self-employed, I didn't plan on being self-employed and was just really at that time was really hesitant and wary of making money. I thought if I was making money from people who were paying me directly as opposed to from an organization or something like that, it sort of felt like theft. It felt like I was taking money from people by like having rates and stuff. And I just got really, really lucky, blessed. June Casewith, Des Davis, two of my first money teachers, both queer women of color who just helped me shift that lens. And then I started doing constellation work with money. And that was a whole game changer because that let me tap into the energy of money. And people, there's this nuanced thing where like, there's a lot of like, I think like woo woo spirituality stuff that talks about the energy of money that often winds up feeling like spiritual bypassing. Thankfully, the containers where I initially learned and then the way that I hold the work doesn't have that impact. And it allowed me to tap into a very clear sense of how loving money is, how supportive money wants to be, and how valuable it can be to have a collaboration with money in a way that like lets us do good shit.
Tell me more, right? Like this living energy of money, this collaboration of money. And I do remember when we first met that first walk, how we both laughed and were like, money can be so fun. It can be so
Yeah.
enjoyable. It can ease things. It's just like a
Yes.
wonderful, juicy
Yes.
lubricant.
I love yes. Yes. Always, always, all days. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll share a little bit about my personal experience with family
Yeah.
constellations. I'll also invite people to, you've done family constellation work on podcasts and other
Mm.
places. So I'll make sure to link those here
Yeah.
because it's one thing to hear about it, it's another thing to witness it,
Yeah.
and it's even better to experience it
Yeah.
yourself. The first time I did it, I was amazed at how little talking there actually was. It was all like vibes, energy. It was me remembering a different situation. And then also just feeling like the container was safe enough. The practitioner that was facilitating it was present enough for me to project all of the things onto these two other
Mm.
people who were not talking, right? It was so magical. And then in hearing you do it with on money and other podcasts, I'm just again so amazed by its power. A question that's coming to me right off the top of my, it's like, how could we do that with more people? Like, how can people do it on their own? How could we expand
Mm.
the power of family constellations,
Yeah.
or does it really need to be in a small private setting? Like, what are your thoughts on that as a practitioner?
Yeah. I think that it's so I have two thoughts on this. One, for a long time, I was gate kept from understanding and appreciating my own genius, right? There were kind of like gatekeepers who like put me down, and then eventually it became a gatekeeper in my own head, and I was gatekeeping myself, right? So I don't really subscribe to like, ah, well, you have to study this many years, you have to do this, you have to do that, whatever, whatever. And at the same time, for my own self, when I started studying constellation work, I knew that there were no teachers who were going to teach what I needed to serve the community that I served. So I knew that I was going to have to learn from the teachers that I had access to, and then I was going to have to shape the work in order to make it fit for my community, which tends to be predominantly of color, predominantly queer. And so I studied very intentionally, and just like, I studied for a year first with my primary teacher. Then I continued studying with her and just began facilitating work in small groups of circles with friends, for myself, just practicing. You know what I mean? It wasn't until year 3 that I began facilitating for, like, semi-strangers, people who I had light acquaintanceship, and I think it might have been not until, like, year 4 that I actually began just off the cuff facilitating for people who would come to me, like, you know what I mean? People that I had met day of type of thing. And so, like everything, when something is sort of, like, in your flow, it can be incredibly fluid and incredibly easy. And on the back end, there's actually a lot of math that's going on. There's a lot of like minute understanding of like when I'm facilitating, there are minute things that I'm picking up on and tweaks that I'm making. So when I'm sometimes clients will ask me, like, can I just do this kind of like by myself? And I will never say no, right? I'm always one who's like, listen to your magic and trust your own body. And I think that this question of how do we help more people do it, I think that it was really important for me to study with someone that I trusted, and to begin doing it for myself. And, from there, I think I don't subscribe to just let's make this quick video series and then everyone can do it on their own. That doesn't feel healthy for me.
Yeah. And I guess it's just that desire. If like I see something that's powerful, how do we bring it to more people? And yet what you're saying is so true. It reminds me of like when you're learning how to do a dance, right? You've got to really practice the basics until they're embodied.
Mm,
And so much of the time, I know when I'm working with clients, I could go back and kind of say like these are the things that I was doing, but in the moment, I'm so present with clients that I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. So that's what I'm hearing you say. Like as a practitioner who's been working with constellations for years, it took a certain amount of studying, working with people you already knew in order to expand it. Okay, that's
yeah.
helpful to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it often is this kind of like little bit of a vicious cycle, right? Of like people want to learn. We don't live in a culture. There's nuances to so many different things, right? So I am a practitioner, for example, generally speaking. There's lots of ways to like quote, quote, learn from me online. Like you can learn from my Instagram or you can learn from my YouTube, right? But like in order to have actual proximal contact to me, you do need to pay some money, right? Like, so I run a practice group that's $35 a month. And there are people who have been in the practice group for years, for, 3 years at this point. I trust a lot of those people because of what they have absorbed just from being in consistent practice with me. They would know how to run shit. They would know how to do it, you know what I mean? But they've also been in, like, consistent practice, and I think that a lot of times it's again coming back to this nuance with money of we're looking for free resources. The communities that need resources the most oftentimes don't have the money to, like, pay for those things, and we kind of keep going back into this, like, loop-de-loop, and I think that part of the way of interrupting that cycle for me is actually to start to get, because a lot of people that I have worked with and who I know personally who are afraid to pay money to learn a thing actually have the resources to do so, but there's just so much scarcity mindset around like, oh my God, well, if I pay for this, if I lose this, all of that kind of thing. People don't want to put money into circulation. And there's just like magical ways when we just like say, look, I'm a hunker down and I'm going to pay for this training for this year, right? I'm actually going to be okay. I've been housed, I've been fed for the last 5 years. I'm not pressed about it. I trust this person. I'm going to learn from them for the next year. And there's beautiful ripple effects of how the magic can move from there. But it's like this thing of like, we have to be nourished in order for medicine to be moved. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm thinking about, well, when people don't want to pay for a service that they want, there's this kind of denial that they're creating for themselves, right? So they're moving from a place of lack of worth, and it can be really, and again, it's so subtle because you don't want to blame the victim. Like there's a reason that there's that lack of worth, right? And then where there are ways that we can start to shift out of it. And sometimes it's as small as giving yourself more time to do nothing, more time to
Mm.
rest, right? As you start to feel more settled in your body, you'll see that you can take more risk or more investments into
Mm.
yourself. I'm also thinking of the times that I've paid for things. I remember paying for a business coach who I learned was not aligned with what I wanted to do.
Oh,
And I'm
no.
glad I did it. But
Yeah.
no, I'm glad I
Yeah.
did it
Yeah.
because there was a part of me that thought I should do business the way that she was doing business.
Yeah.
And I needed to work with her to fully, fully, fully embody the fact that that was not the way I was going to do business.
Yes.
And later that year, I paid the same amount of money to
Yeah.
work with another coach who actually validated what I knew
Ah,
inside of me and who really gave me permission to relax into the fact that, like, I don't like blind, what is it called? Like, I don't even know what it's called. Like, when you reach out to people blindly to see if
cold
they'll work with
DMs.
you.
Cold. Yeah.
I don't like cold calling. That's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
my style. And I knew that, but I thought there was something wrong with me for not liking it or for not knowing how
Mm,
to be able to do it.
yeah.
6 months later, I work with someone else who says it's fine.
Yeah.
Right? And starting just to see that there are so many ways. Like one of the things that I'm working on right now is like, how do you define success? How do I define success?
Mm,
How do I help people define success? Seeing what capitalism tells us is success, and then also seeing what I feel like is success, what's success in my family line and my culture. We get to question everything. And I think a lot of the
mm.
times we forget that we get to question things.
We do get to question and we do get to define things and we do get to choose.
Yeah. So I think for people who are like, oh, I can't afford that, I would invite them to be really compassionate with that voice in them that says they can't afford it. And to it'll start to the word that comes to me is desmenuzar. It'll start to like fall
Mm,
apart a little bit
mm,
if you just are like, well, I can't afford it. And like you
mm.
said, when we again, this is like a manifestation thingy of like when you leap, the net will find you.
Yeah.
Except it does happen so often.
Mhm. One thing that I always say is that like I don't subscribe per se to the belief. I think there's something again kind of like spiritual bypassy around like too much of like, oh, everything in your life is because you have created it this way. I do to some extent believe that for my own self, you know what I mean? But like I think that there's heaviness around that. It doesn't take in so many different factors. But when I'm working with clients who often have negative narratives around themselves or negative narratives around what's possible financially, the thing that I remind them of two things. One is that words are spells. That's not some new age shit. Like that is old. Like so many cultures, like indigenous cultures globally, know that our words are spells. So words are spells. Cast your spell the way you want to. And two, I don't believe that if you that something is or isn't coming to you per se because of whatever beliefs you're holding. But I do believe that when we believe something is possible, it's easier for that thing to find its way towards us. When we believe something good can happen, it's easier for good to come into the room.
Yeah. And that's one thing I work with people on, like, even allowing yourself to want something.
Yes.
Allow yourself to want to pay a business
Yes.
coach, to want to invest in yourself.
Yeah.
And over time, again, it'll become easier to give yourself permission to actually do it.
Yeah.
There's this, it's like the, it's the way that a brush, like internalized depression is saying, I can't even want the thing that I want. I'm going to
Mm.
pretend not to want it in order to keep myself safe.
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah. Yeah.
And there were times when, for us, when for our ancestors, that was a really life giving strategy.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
was a lot of wisdom in saying, nope, don't want it. It's
Yeah.
dangerous. And then you will get to a place where that will no longer be true.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So, okay. So for nonviolent communication, you said three things are needed:
Mm.
choice, connection to self, and connection to the collective.
Mhm.
How do we bring that to money, especially with
Ooh, yes. Huh? I got you. Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Number one, we choose. I think this is true. Anytime I catch myself thinking I quote, quote, can't afford it, I say no. Either I'm choosing to pay for that or I'm not choosing to pay for that. I think that with money, you really need to be honest about that. You need to, A, look at your bank accounts. If you have 50,000 stashed in a Roth IRA, and then you're not paying for something else, that's a choice. You have 50, there may be penalties, this and that, it's true, right? But you have the assets there and you're choosing not to tap into that because you're choosing for that to be there for a different purpose, right? So, and even times last year I got a credit card so that I could take out a 25K line of credit to work with a business coach who was one of the biggest blessings in my life. I'm so glad that I made that decision, right? And again, that was a choice I made. I said, "Yes, I want this. This is the way I am going to have it and I'm going to get it." So, you have to be really really genuinely honest with yourself. I never use the words I can't afford it. I will just say I'm choosing to do this or I'm not choosing to do this. In terms of connection to yourself, I think that there's so many different things when it comes to money, but you have to be open to receiving. You have to be open to having your needs met. You also have to be aware of your boundaries and your capacity, right? So, really being able to tap in on that. And then I think, in terms of listening to the collective, I think and again, I think it's different for different populations. Like, kind of like as you were saying, I think that there are some folks who are not so tuned in to the fact that there is a collective that is in need of financial resources. I think that a lot of the people that I tend to work with are hyper aware that there is a collective need, right? And then just kind of like hemorrhages from themselves in order to try and to address the collective need. And we have to remember that collective need requires collective coming together and collective solutioning, right? Like, so me in my business right now, there are, I think, 5 people that I have capacity. So, like, my business, part of what my business structure is that I have set up within my business that there are 3 people who I have on my, like, payroll essentially. I just pay them to exist, right? Like, 5% of my gross income comes in, immediately gets redistributed to those 3 people. They just invoice me, and that's a done deal. And then I have one virtual assistant right now, maybe taking on another. And I'm also, so one of the things that I do in my business is I provide like business mentorship for people who are figuring their stuff out. And I have a client right now, a business mentor client who is for free and will be free throughout this year. And I meet with him once a week. And he just does the most wonderful, loveliest, like important work in the community that he serves. And that is my capacity. That's and then I have like in my business, I have a digital product where 100% of those sales go back to one of my very beloved teachers and friends. Yeah. Oh, no, it's not that. Not that. One of my very beloved teachers started the Sugar Heal Gang, which is a Black birth worker collective that supports Black and Indigenous birth care. And so I have a digital product where 100% of the proceeds go back to that organization, right? So I
And
think
what is a digital product? I mean, let
oh,
us know
is
so that
it? Yes, 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 it is. It is a tarot and astrology workbook on healing money trauma. So I think all told so far this year, I know that my business has leveraged somewhere between ten to $15,000 back into other people's hands. But coming back to this piece about the collective, right? You have to remember, we have to remember, one person cannot hold all people. We can serve the people that we can serve. We do it in a structured way. We do it in a way where we get to stay well. But if you are trying to build a business where everybody gets everything for free or something like that, it can be done. But then the money, the resources have to be coming in from somewhere. The replenishment has to be coming in from somewhere, but you can't take on one person cannot take on a collective load that is unhealthy. And I think that that is also it's not an ethical way to be of service. It's too much.
Yeah, because you think of like the Mobius strip, right? When you look at a Mobius strip, it's that infinity sign where the inside becomes the outside becomes the inside. That's often how I think about social justice work, that I have to be included within the
Mm,
community. My well being, my ability to know that I am fed, that I have shelter, that I can have fun, that I can sleep, like those are things that nurture me. And it's not so much about, like, this is one thing I had to learn. It's not so much about nurturing myself so that I can be of service to be the collective, but nurturing me because I
because
get
you're
to be
lovely,
nurtured.
because you're yummy, because it's good to have some lubricants in and around. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just for the sake of it. Let's move into the highly sensitive person.
Mm,
So I'd love to
yeah.
hear what your understanding of this term is, when you came into it. Is it a term that you use? Do you find it helpful?
Yeah. So I went to grad school for occupational therapy, and the field is of occupational therapy. Like occupational therapists developed all the science, all the content behind understanding sensory processing and like highly sensitive people, right? Like the sensory spectrum is really, really within the scope and development of occupational therapists. And I sort of regret that I can't remember any of the people's names who like developed some of this research. So I've had an understanding of sensory processing. I went to grad school 2015 to 2017. So I've had an understanding of sensory processing since then, and I used it a lot in kind of like helping clients who had pretty significant trauma histories understand their sensory needs. And I think that the term highly sensitive person, I don't know that I do or don't use it in any particular way. I do not identify as a highly sensitive person, but I have a lot of loved ones who do. And one of the things we know is that we live in a world that's designed for people who can handle a lot of sensory input. And that's just not who the majority of the world actually is. And then, like, so then already, like, a majority of people are being pushed out of their bodies, made to feel less safe in their bodies because they're not growing up in sensory environments that make the body a safe place to be.
So I've heard that it's like 20 to 30% of the population identifies as highly sensitive. And for me, when I first heard this term, the term sensitive felt too feminine. And honestly, it
Mm.
felt like weak. It's like the word
Uh-huh.
delicate felt weak. And it's now changed. I've now seen the joy of it, right? Of being able to like
Mm.
see something more subtle
Yeah,
and find pleasure in it. Like I think of how the term helped me better understand myself and my needs.
yeah.
And also when I'm working with people on their money, it's like, well, how do we make sure that they can see what it feels like to feel centered and safe in your body
Yeah.
while working with money. And when people are highly sensitive, there's sometimes more things that need to be done or
Yeah.
taken out
Yes.
in order for it to work.
Yeah. A buddy of mine, and I actually don't actually know how to pronounce her last name. I think it's Sharon Manchuria. She also we went to grad school together, and she developed a tool called the sensory budget, which helps clients understand first, what are your sensory needs? How much capacity do you have for different types of sensory input? And then we'll kind of like map out what your day looks like and understand again from like a brain processing input. How much sensory information can you take in before you're tapped out? And then you can kind of do this kind of like almost like a mathematic equation of like, oh, I didn't expect to be at the bank for so long. And then there was a big fight at the bank or something, right? There was a lot of noise at the bank. So then the budget, right, gets lower. And so that helps you track what your actual capacity is. Because kind of as you were saying, you can't do functionally, you have to have enough energy and bandwidth in order to do tasks that require an emotional toll from you, as well as like looking at a spreadsheet is not easy. Like, figuring out like bank balances, like, just in and of itself, it can be overwhelming, right? Like, unless you're a Virgo. And so, like, being able to actually mark, here's how much capacity I have, here's how much has been used, and then here's how much I have left to work with. It's so needed.
Yeah. And the positive sides for me of like recognizing my high sensitivity and also like learning to enjoy it is just to see like there's this song by Nirvana, Easily Amused. I've always thought that about myself and thought it was really funny, but like sitting outside on a bench taking in the sun is so luxurious.
Oh,
And I feel those are like the positive sides of being highly sensitive,
yes.
of just like tiny little things. The joy that I get from that feels expanded.
Hmm. I love that.
So just to remind people, and it doesn't, as you learn what you need, what your system needs at this time, and you learn to listen, it becomes easier and easier to incorporate that into
Yeah.
your day and to incorporate it into your money so that money can then just be a lubricant as opposed to like something that creates hardship.
Friction. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things that I heard in one of your podcasts and that you mentioned earlier in our conversation was that self worth is not connected to the number in your account, right, or how
Yeah.
much you charge.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear like how do you help entrepreneurs kind of detangle that
Oh, yeah.
pricing and self value?
So a lot of it happens during the constellation work, the ancestral healing work itself, because a lot of times any conversation about money, if you have two people who are in a romantic partnership and they get into an argument about money, it's never about money, right? The arguments we get into about money or conflict about money is always about something much deeper than that, some other unfulfilled need. And so what I'm doing.
You should say that. So when
Okay.
you have conflict around money, it's usually around something much deeper.
Yes, it is always around something much deeper. Always.
Yeah.
Money is like one of those things where it's like a stand-in that we like put the blame on money for, but it's actually something else, something that we are maybe more scared to have a conversation around or don't realize we need to have a conversation around. But so in my work with clients, one, during the ancestral healing work, we're finding out where that gunk actually comes from, right? Like who was the ancestor, what part of the lineage that and entanglements can happen anywhere, but like where did a piece of trauma happen that then got money tangled up and got self-worth tangled up? And how do we untangle all of those things so that somatically in your body you can start to breathe a little bit easier with money? And then what I will guide people through are just my kind of like the more nuts and bolts pieces, which are my primary principles that like your pricing is not related to your worth. My worth is inherent. The worth of my clients is inherent. Your pricing is not related to the value of what you offer. 5 minutes with me will change your world. 5 minutes with me is invaluable, right? I think about pricing as a form of play, and I think about pricing as what do I functionally need to receive in order to meet my needs, right? So I don't want to see like I don't want to see more than 4 clients per month. So I set my one-to-one pricing, it depending on like what type of one-to-one service you want, anywhere from 3 to 4,000 as a package, right? And then that lets me, okay, if I get 4 clients a month, my bases are covered and I have other things going that will cover other things. But like that's just a functional pricing. That's not related to the value of what I give. That's not related to the worth of anyone who's coming in. That's just related to this is how much time I want to spend on my work. And so this is where I need to set my pricing to make that easy for me. And also with like, if I want to save this much, if I want to be paying off my student loans, again, just what is the math breakdown of what needs to come in order to make it work?
And it can be so difficult to say out loud, this is how much money I need per month,
Yeah.
and this is how many clients I'm willing to see,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Especially for, again, going back to overgiving. You're like, but I want to see as many people as I can before I collapse exhausted at the end of
Hmm.
the day.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I love being able, the one mentorship client that I have this year, who I'll be working with him for free throughout the year. I love being able to give him such a rich, full amount of attention. And I love that I don't feel exhausted when I'm doing that.
And that makes it more potent,
Yeah.
right? For you, for him, for the collective that you're both serving.
Hmm.
One of the things that I invite people to do, I got this exercise from Barry Tesler, who wrote The Art of Money. I don't know if you're
Okay.
familiar
I
with
haven't read
her.
it. No,
She
I
does.
don't think so. Yeah.
She works since she was originally a somatics. She worked somatics therapist, and then she became a bookkeeper, and then she
No.
wrote this book. And she talks about a three-tiered budget, where you have the first one is like your basics, your rice and beans kind of life.
Mm.
The second one is you're comfortable. You've got more
Yeah.
luxury, you've got more eating out, you've got more vacations, you've got more giving others, and then your opulent one.
Mm.
And when I have people who are under earners, I invite them to do those three, to
Mm.
even put a number
Yeah.
to what it would take for them to be opulent.
Yeah.
Because saying out loud, this is what I want,
Yeah.
makes it easier to see. Again, going back to that manifestation thing, it makes it easier to see opportunities that can get you there. It
Yeah.
makes it easier to see, this is how many clients I need. This is how many clients. This is what my full price will be.
Yeah. And it makes it easier to believe that, kind of like you were saying, things are possible. I'm thinking of 2 things. One, a personal experience for me. I remember the first time I, like, raised my prices in a particular way, I was really terrified that I would cut out people that I cared about serving. I was afraid that I would cut out Black and brown folk. I was afraid that I would cut out queer and trans folk. I was afraid that I would cut out disabled folk. Like, I was scared of all of those things. And the first person who, after I did that, who reached out and said, I want to work with you, we had our connection call and they said, yeah, it's a go. I want to work with you. All of those, like all of those populations, you know what I mean? I was like, oh, it is absolutely possible to serve the populations that I care about, for me to be well, for this to not be extraction. It was an easy yes for them. In my sales techniques, I really look for the yes. I'm not interested in working with people who don't, you know what I mean, who feel pressured in any way. So one, like sometimes we need those wins to set a standard for like it can actually be this easy, it can actually be possible. And every spring, I teach a healing, like a multi-week healing money trauma program. And one of the exercises that we do in the class is I have people name what they want, kind of like what they want to make or whatever, or just say, but like, and then everybody's like, people want to pay you that much. People want to pay you more than that. People want to pay you 10 times that much. People are going to get together with their friends and they're going to create a class and you're going to get paid 100 times that much, right? Because we have to feel that energy in our body. It feels so lonely and it feels so impossible without that belief.
Yeah, that community of just like reminding you that yes, what you want is possible and it's
Yeah.
possible for everyone.
Yeah.
One of the things that helped me accept more, be able to receive more, was to also acknowledge that I want everyone
Mm.
to be able to receive more. I want everyone to feel at ease. And just like Crazy Horse, maybe I won't see it in my generation, but it is possible.
Mm.
There are
And
things, there are changes that could be made. Yeah.
I love because what you just said reminded me of what you were saying about like the infinity loop. And it also ties in, when I do ancestral healing work, we're not actually healing anybody else but yourself, right? The work is all like in a beautifully selfish way. How do you heal your own shit? And then it ripples forward from there. So when I hear you say that you want everybody to receive and everybody to be well in this way, and that it's almost like that you receiving is becoming part of that infinity loop that like sets wheels in motion, however it may happen, but that sets wheels in motion for like this to be true for everybody because you are part of everybody, right? So in order if you are part of everybody, then you must receive well as well. And I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's setting the standard. It's which is something you just said. The first time that someone, yes, does pay that higher rate, it lets you know that it's possible. Just as like when you have conflict with someone and it comes out in a beautiful way where you both
Yeah.
actually feel closer to each other, because that can happen in conflict. The
Yeah.
first time that happens, you're like, wow,
Yeah.
conflict can be life giving.
Yeah.
All right. So, my last question, being satisfied, content, and feeling like enough
Mm,
can be really countercultural in many circles, right? In many,
mm,
because of our systems of colonial capitalism, all the oppression and extraction that for the most part we see. And another thing is that scarcity and abundance, like scarcity, not having enough, and abundance, always wanting more, they often feel like the same kind of energetic tone for me.
mm,
They're both kind of grasping.
mm,
I think really the opposite of both of those is being content, is being at ease. So I'd love to
mm,
hear your thoughts on like the way that I kind of separate. I kind of put scarcity and abundance in one pile and then enough on the other. I'd love to
mm.
hear your thoughts. Do you agree, disagree?
I think what feels true to share, one of the things, this is in relation to a manifestation, or not a manifestation technique, but like the underlying math of manifestation. The underlying math of manifestation is actually believing that who you are right now is perfect, that everything, like, to be, we oftentimes think, when I have this thing, I'm going to be happy. When I have this thing, I am going to be safe. When I have this thing, I'm going to be well, right? What if those things were already on their way to you? How would you feel right now? How would your life change? How would your body change? How would your energy change? Because that's the energetic vibration that is in alignment with all of those things that we want and that we need. And because I am a person who does subscribe to some of these beliefs, they're not for everybody. It's just a math equation, like what works for you. A lot I sort of credit the abundance and the joy that I've had from a practice of constantly looking for ways in which, for proof that things are working out, and for constantly trying to be in a somatic practice of like, I like who I am. It's kind of like, so for listeners, Deanna and I went to the Cheesecake Factory like a couple, like a month ago or something like that, right? And
Delicious.
it really was. And we were talking about partnership, and I am definitely looking for my wife. I am looking for my person. And I'm also just coming out of a relationship with someone that we both thought it was going to be the one. And I remember saying to you, right? The universe could bring me someone right now. Like someone could someone could trip next to the waiter, and then that could be my person right there. And when I said that, I was like, "Oh yeah, that is true." Like I've remembered that conversation, and I've been like, how would I move through the world if I knew that that was what was coming? How would I move through my day if I just knew I just needed to be here because I'm awesome and the good things are on their way to me, right? And obviously this is easier said than done, but in terms of like enoughness, abundance, I just like, it's enough to be able to have coffee in the morning and to see the sun when I go outside. I think sometimes for me, that's what fills my cup of the enoughness. And then everything else are things that help me feel more good.
Yeah. So the what I'm kind of hearing is like feeling content, and enough right now makes it more likely to have abundance.
Yeah, something like that, I think. I'm not a manifestation teacher. I'm just like regurgitating, but I
Mhm.
think that's the essence of the math. Yeah.
Well, and I also think about how, like in the US, we talk about people being consumers, and maybe that's worldwide by now,
Mm.
right? And the thing about consuming is that you're never actually full. You're always like
Yeah,
grasping,
totally.
grasping, grasping.
Right.
So that's the
Yeah.
part that I'm just like, let's go and let's let go of that and see that right now, drinking your coffee with or without a partner, you're
Mhm.
already okay.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
the thing that's when I think about partnership and I think about children, I think about all those things. Me feeling good right now will make it so much more joyful for
I
other
love
people to come into my
yes.
life
Mhm.
because I won't be asking them to help me feel good. I'll already feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been thinking about, like, just, like, building new friendships even and stuff, and how much easier it is, for example, to it's easy and it's sweet to build friendships from a place of emotional stability. And, you and I have still had conversations about things that are hard for us or things, when you were like, when we were at Cheesecake Factory and you were like, you look like you're going to cry. And I was like, I am going to cry and I'm tired. I got to go. I'm done. Like, you still talk about the things, like feelings still happen, but just in the same way that, like, when we can hold there's a way that we can hold a sort of sweet balance when we're in our own body. I think it's like dance, right? Like, I'm a partner dancer, and I'm not like a intuitively quote quote good dancer. There are some people who are. I've had to work hard to learn to be good at any of the dances that I do. But like in dance, you're always sort of both holding your own weight as well as being in a back and forth weight sharing with your partner. And I think if we think about that with the universe around us, right? Like, when we can hold little bit of our own weight of like, I'm awesome, then it's easy to dance with the universe.
Yeah. We often find mirrors, right? So whatever we
Yeah.
think we are is what will resonate. Like we'll resonate with people who also reflect that back. And I think of the stepping stones that are needed.
Yeah.
Sometimes I know where I want to be and I know where I've been. And there's just these little increments that I need that I move along until I get to the new place, right? So
Yeah.
maybe you know what you want to charge your clients and you're only comfortable
Yes.
going halfway there.
Yeah.
Stay in your range of tolerance.
Yeah.
Take that step that feels doable so that you can grow your sense of well being. I think the same thing with my dating. I'm like, this person's better than the last one, but they're not fully where I want to be.
Yeah.
And I'm like, baby girl, you're on your way.
Yeah.
You're in it.
Incrementally better decisions is what my friend Rashan says. Incrementally better decisions.
And it's okay. We also talked about that, right? Of like, just whatever we have to work with right now is the thing that we have to work with. And
Yeah.
one of my mentors always used to talk about mastery. Master the current level you're at. Fully learn from it
Yeah.
wherever you are so that when the next one comes up, you're able to master that one. And it's just, it can be a really joyful dance.
I love that. Yeah.
So I've really enjoyed our
I have
conversation. I
too.
hope that everyone can follow it. I feel like at some point we were
Mhm.
just like having our conversation.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's such a pleasure to be in this money work with you,
Yeah.
Meenadchi. I'm very technical in the work that I do with my clients. I'm looking at estate planning and insurance and all of that. And I love knowing that I can also send people your way when
Mm.
they have ancestors to look through or when the
Mm.
gunk is just so buried underneath
Yeah.
that we need to call in some magic.
Yeah. Oh. Mhm. Thank you.
So, Manachi, where can people find you?
Mhm. So the first place is the easiest place is my website. It's my name, Meenadchi.com. And then you can find me on Instagram at with.meenadchi. And I don't actually know what my LinkedIn is, but like, again, I have like a very unique name. Just put me into Google. You will find me there.
And I'll include those in the show notes, as well as an episode or two where you've done a sample of family constellations with money so that people can really get a taste of your work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thanks for the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Highly Sensitive Money Podcast. It's been a joy to delve into the profound and transformative work of ancestral healing and financial empowerment with Meenadchi. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll continue to explore the complexities of money, sensitivity, and personal development. Thanks for listening.